Humphrey Hawksley, if you don't know him, we've had a long relationship with Humphrey since early 90s, I think, as a movement.
Yes.
And Humphrey was a long time with the BBC, and he opened the bureau in Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to report on wars and conflicts all over the world. And he told me once, when all the people are going away from conflict, his role was to go the other way.
Yes, including Kosovo and Tirana, so,
Wow.
and Montenegro, so that whole...
You've seen it at the rough end. And one thing that is difficult, I think, for many people in the UK is Korea is so far away, and a number of our activities in the last year were about Korea. And I'd like to ask Humphrey, because he was reporting on the Korean Peninsula a lot in the BBC, I'd like to ask Humphrey, and of course, actually I should mention your book, Asian Waters.
Yes, which has got Korea in it. It's which we'll talk about, but placing the Korean Peninsula in a global context so that we know where to find it, essentially. Yeah.
So Asian Waters covers all of the flashpoints in East Asia, but particularly Asian Waters, I think, it sums the geopolitical context within which the Korean Peninsula takes its place. Could you tell us something about the history and the context of the Korean Peninsula and how?
Yeah, I think that as far as finding Korea and the issues and where it is, it bounces off what is happening elsewhere. So if we remember back to 2017 when Donald Trump got in, the note that was left to him from Barack Obama, whether he read it or not, we don't know, was that your biggest threat to settle is the Korean Peninsula. That's the one. And during those months that he first came in, it was bleeding a bit into our headlines because carrier groups were going there and there was missile tests and all that sort of thing. If we flash forward to where we are now, Korean Peninsula has been overtaken by Taiwan. So the headlines of those sort of stories are about whether China is going to invade Taiwan, not whether North Korea is going to send a nuclear missile to America or Japan. So therefore it sort of gets off the headlines here. But just to answer your question about those flashpoints, and particularly about the Korean Peninsula, this is a problem that goes back to the Second World War. In fact, all of the flashpoints in the Indo-Pacific, as it's called now, are Second World War problems, or the years after the Second World War when there was rapid decolonization. So if you think back, or if you've got a vague idea of what happened there, you had Vietnam and the Korean Peninsula divided pretty much down the middle between the Soviet Union in the north of those places and the US in the south. Very much like Europe was divided. Big guys in corridors and around lunches said, well, you can have this, you can have that, and it was divided. And what the Koreans did in the north, which actually shows the sort of ingenuity and stamina of the people, as they created the most enduring and ruthless dictatorship that there is. And it's endured. Others have collapsed, but the North Korean one has endured. So, there's a number of elements there, but if we think about Taiwan, India and Pakistan, the Korean Peninsula, even the South China Sea stuff, all of these are problems that essentially date back to unfinished business in the 1940s and 50s. And as I just said, because the Koreans are sort of such a dogged and ingenious culture, and we've seen that with the way that South Korea has exported its technology, its multinationals are now probably in my phone and all that sort of thing, and then you've got the Squid Games thing and the Gangnam and all this sort of stuff. This is South Korea's ingenuity. North Korea's ingenuity is the way it holds this regime together when all the other ones around the world have essentially collapsed.
Could you tell us something about the North Korean system of government? It's sort of in the age of Stalin and so on, but in a sense that has endured.
It has endured because it's basically a Marxist-Leninist regime, and not dissimilar to Albania was during the Cold War. And because of the way that it was clamped down, it managed to create what's called the Hermit Kingdom. And this has become some fairly efficient, well thought out structures of holding the regime together. What's slightly different in this is that it is a Marxist-Leninist family dictatorship. So, where the heir is automatically, there's no question that it's going to be the son or something like that takes over. So you've had three generations of that. And they have a philosophy, an ideology called Juche, which is meant to be self-reliance, and they have a tower in Pyongyang with a flame on top of it, and this is what everybody is meant to, believe in. And you have the great leader or the dear leader and these sort of demigod type of people, which is not dissimilar to if you were driving through Iraq or Syria and you saw Assad or Saddam Hussein on the side of every building. This is not a dissimilar situation. But you wake up every morning and you know who's in charge. And you can't buck that person. But so you have to do essentially what that person says, or you're going to lose everything you've got. I think the key thing, Robin, when one talks about unification of this, is that when you have a system like that, a system that we saw, say, in Iraq, and you tried to dismantle it and unify it with something, you have to make sure that the people that run that system feel they're going to be safe under the new system. And however evil they've been, and however many people they've killed and put into jail and whatever, if they don't feel that their pensions and their houses and their status, in Asia, face is very important, their status is going to be secure, you've got a problem. In Iraq, which I also covered, when the Americans went in and de-Baathification happened, like the denazification. So they took out everybody that was a member or senior member of the Baath Party. And those people ran things. They ran the electricity grids, they ran the water system, they ran the traffic lights, they ran the hospitals. So you can't go into North Korea and do that because it collapses. And then you will get a situation, I suspect, where provincial generals and party leaders will sort of secede and with their weapons, and you'll get a civil war of sorts and that sort of thing. So when you get this idea about unification or whatever it is, it's, and we found this in Iraq, we found it in Afghanistan, and I get quite angry when I get involved in these discussions with people that haven't thought it through. It is not that, you're not going to just have an election and a panoply of great things are going to fall down from the heavens, and you're going to have a fire service that's perfectly efficient, a police force that's efficient, and no corruption, and all the rest of it. That's not going to happen. And I think we know that now from Afghanistan and from, the Arab Spring and everything. We know that's not going to happen. The question is how to do it, how to sort of ease it forward so that, as somebody in Taiwan told me when they went from dictatorship to democracy, so that when it does happen, everybody wakes up in the morning, suddenly they're a free people and a democracy, but nothing actually changes. They still get on the bus and go to work.
Thank you. Those are wonderful insights. Coming back to our original point, what's its relevance to your man in the street in London?
You mean rather than a Downing Street party that, that transfixes our minds?
What's its relevance? It's a long way away. The only time we hear about it is, there's a missile test or something. What's its relevance?
The relevance now, in today's world, is very different to what its relevance was, say, when Trump took over 4 years ago. Because now there's a realization has seeped into everybody around the world on two things. One is that the American democracy banner is totally stained. And secondly, that whatever America promises now, 4 years later it can change. So don't invest in it. Yeah. And the third thing, which is, I think, the most serious, is that authoritarianism, as projected by China, has got a point. So when you talked about the collapse of the unpredictable collapse of the Berlin Wall and all that sort of thing, there was a period then when we thought that was how life is going to be. Everything is now going to become a democracy because that wall has come down and it's all, but that was wrong. That's called the end of history. And it's taken 30 years since that happened for the elites, as I say, to begin this discussion about authoritarianism and what good it can bring that democracy doesn't bring. And essentially, it is an economic thing. And the Taiwanese practice this. So I think when I say the Taiwanese practice, there's a level of education and economic wealth distribution to which, if you go beyond that, you need democracy and accountability and a system of that. And when you go below it, then it's actually dangerous to bring it in because you get ethnic and vested interests all fighting each other. What does that mean now? It means that in those flashpoints, the Korean Peninsula is in that mix. Any one of those elements could flare up, or one that we don't know, at any moment, and we here, as walking down the street, will read the headlines and saying, we have to beat China. Or let's get rid of the dictators, or be patriotic and fly the flag. And because, or since, or whatever the thing is the global Britain element now, which you'll see in the foreign policy, is that we're striking trade deals or trying to strike trade deals out in Asia, Indo-Pacific, because that's the global economic engine is now seen to be out there. In order to do that, we have to strike new alliances with Japan, with India, and China is this, nobody quite knows what to do about China or what sort of country it is. But the narrative at the moment that's being projected by, mainly out of Washington and being followed by here, is that China is an evil authoritarian state that has to be stopped. Now, I don't agree with that narrative. But we can see how the patriotic flag, the democracy flag, these sort of false banners, as it were, can lead us quite quickly into conflict. Korean Peninsula is part and parcel of that. And in one way, the regime there, which is not necessarily gets on well with China, but it's propped up by China, is a tap that can be turned on and off. So if there is a flare-up over Taiwan or over Hong Kong or something in Xinjiang, then you could turn on the North Korean missile tap to deflect attention from that. On the plus side, I would say that, as I said at the beginning, is that Kim Jong-un and all of that structure around him. These are very experienced, very intelligent, very well-educated people on how to knit a dictatorship together. They know that if they do fire a missile at Japan or one towards Guam or something, the lifespan of that dictatorship could be measured in minutes because America would just take it out. which is a good thing in a way, because it means they won't do it. That's mutually assured destruction. They're not crazy. He likes his pizzas, he likes his wine, he likes watching his American movies. He doesn't want to be blown up by an American missile, because he won't get anywhere. But I think the conundrum on unification, you're never going to involve the British voter on unification in the Korean Peninsula unless there's a conflict involved. And actually, the less it's on our pages and the less the British are aware of it, the better it is. Because then you can get, what needs to happen in the north is it needs to follow China's footsteps of 30, 40 years ago and begin to open up, begin to grow the economy, educate the people, build the high-speed rails and the skyscrapers and the factories, and make itself the new factory of the world, like Vietnam has done, and that's still a Marxist state, but it's not a threat, and it's treating its people better, although it's not brilliant. Release the, in 2001, China closed its labor camps because it wanted to join the World Trade Organization. Get into a situation where it's better for the North Koreans to end those dreadful labor camps and join the global economy. The block to that is that you wouldn't get it through the US Congress and the sanctions and everything. So it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen for 20 years or 10 years or whatever it is. But that is the only way forward for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Humphrey.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you.